The door hit the wall hard enough to rattle the mounted antlers above the fireplace, and every head in the common room of the Waystone Inn swung toward the entrance. Abel Morgan had his hand around a clay mug he'd been about to refill when the draft hit him, cold and sharp with the smell of autumn rain and something older pine sap, road dust, the particular bite of the high borderlands. He looked up from behind the bar and saw her standing in the doorway, and every muscle in his body went very still. She was an orc woman, tall enough that the top of her head nearly brushed the doorframe, broad-shouldered, but with a figure that drew the eye in a way he hadn't expected. She wore fitted travel leathers, dark brown, worn smooth at the elbows and knees from long use, laced tight down the front of a sleeveless bodice that showed the strong lines of her arms and the curves beneath. Her trousers were tucked into knee-high boots with iron buckles. A short traveling cloak, deep green and water-dark from the rain, hung from her shoulders, and she reached up now to pull the hood down. Her skin was the color of old sage, gray-green and smooth, and her hair was black as pitch, pulled back from her face in a thick braid that fell over one shoulder, held at intervals with small bronze rings. Her tusks were short and curved, the tips capped in the same bronze as the rings in her hair, and her eyes were amber, not brown, not gold, but true amber, like resin caught in the morning light, framed by thick dark lashes. There was a long, shallow scar running from her left brow to the corner of that same cheekbone, old enough to have healed pale and clean. She was not young in the way of someone untested. She looked like a woman of perhaps 30 years, weathered in the good way, shaped by hard travel and harder choices. She was carrying a leather satchel over one shoulder, a rolled pack across her back, and two short blades at her hips, the kind of blades a traveler carried, not a soldier. She was also soaking wet, breathing hard and bleeding from a cut on her left forearm. The common room of the Waystone went from moderately loud to completely silent in the space of 2 seconds. Abel set down the mug. There were 9 people in his inn at that moment. 3 were Pilgrim Road surveyors who'd hired the eastern table for the week while they waited out a washed-out Ford. 2 were merchants heading north with a loaded wagon. They couldn't move in the rain. 1 was a woman traveling south to the shrine city of Arrendal, quiet and keeping to herself. The remaining 3 were local men from the village of Crosswater, half a mile down the slope, men who came to the Waystone on wet evenings to drink and be loud about it. It was one of those 3 who spoke first. "You lost, orc." His name was Den Varley, and he was not a cruel man exactly, but he was the kind of man who felt entitled to say out loud what other people kept behind their teeth. He was broad, red-faced, a farmer who owned a decent stretch of land south of town and felt that ownership in every syllable he produced. The orc woman did not look at him. She was looking at Abel. "I need a room," she said. Her voice was low and direct, the kind of voice that had learned not to ask twice. "One night I can pay." Den pushed back from his table. "Waystone doesn't take orcs." "That right, Morgan?" Abel looked at Den. Then he looked back at her. The cut on her arm had soaked through the sleeve of leather and was running in a thin line down the back of her hand. Her jaw was tight. She was watching him with the amber eyes of someone who had been turned away before and was bracing for it again, who had armored herself against refusal so many times that the armor had become just another thing she carried, like the satchel and the blades and the bronze rings in her hair. He reached under the bar and pulled out his room ledger. "Waystone takes anyone who can pay and keep the peace," Abel said. He set the ledger on the bar. "1 room is 12 copper. Stable is 4 more if you've got a horse." "No horse." "Then 12 copper." He opened the ledger and dipped the pen. "Name," a pause, not long but real. "Zora," she said. "Zora Doomhammer." He wrote it down. He had neat handwriting, square and unhurried, the handwriting of a man who spent his days making maps and his evenings keeping books. Zora Doomhammer. He turned the ledger to face her. Den Varley was on his feet now and his 2 companions with him. "Morgan, I'm telling you, Den." Abel did not raise his voice. He almost never raised his voice. He had a way of getting very quiet that the regulars had learned to respect. You can sit down and finish your ale, or you can take your coin back and go home. Either is fine with me. Den's face went a darker shade of red. He looked at the orc woman. He looked at Abel. He looked at his companions, who were suddenly very interested in their drinks. He sat down. Abel came around the end of the bar and held out his hand for her coin. She counted 12 copper into his palm without looking at Varley, and he led her to the room at the end of the upper hall, the one with the heaviest door and the best lock, because he was a practical man. He showed her the water basin, the spare candle, the latch. He pulled a strip of clean linen from the shelf and set it on the washstand without comment. She looked at the linen, then at him. "For the arm," he said. Something shifted in her face, just a fraction. "Thank you," she said, and she said it like she meant it, like she was not accustomed to having to mean it. He left her to it. He came back down the stairs and found the common room watching him. He went back behind the bar and picked up the mug he'd abandoned, and he poured the ale and he went back to work. That was how it started. She came down an hour later, the cut on her arm cleaned and bound with the linen, her cloak hung somewhere to dry. She settled herself at the table nearest the fire, not the one she'd been in before, but a small corner table, 2 seats, with a clear view of both the door and the stairs. The seat of someone who had learned to keep walls at their back. Abel brought her a bowl of the lamb stew he kept on the hearth. He didn't ask if she wanted it. He could see that she hadn't eaten. She looked at the bowl. "I didn't order this. It's included in the room rate." She looked at him with those amber eyes, measuring something. Then she picked up the spoon. He went back to his work and she ate, and the common room slowly remembered how to talk about other things. The Pilgrim Road surveyors were the first to go back to their maps. They were men like Abel, or men in a profession adjacent to his, which meant they had an instinct for irrelevance and a preference for problems they could solve with instruments rather than opinions. The merchants followed. The woman traveling south said goodnight and climbed the stairs. The 3 local men left together in a huddle of muttered dissatisfaction, which Abel accepted as the cost of doing business. He was wiping down the bar at the end of the night, the candles burning low, when he realized she was still there. He'd expected her to go up when the room emptied. Most traveling women, especially those who'd drawn the kind of attention she had, took themselves to the safety of their locked door as quickly as possible. But Zora Doomhammer was still at her corner table, a second cup of the dark ale in front of her, and she was bent over something. Paper. A lot of paper. She had a piece of charcoal in her hand and she was drawing. No, she was marking distances, running her finger along what he now recognized as a road survey. A Pilgrim Road survey. His hands went still on the bar cloth. He'd made that survey 3 years ago when the Arrendal Pilgrim Authority had commissioned a full mapping of the eastern route from the border fort at Keld's crossing all the way to the Shrine City. He recognized his own handwriting in the distance markers, his own particular way of notating elevation changes with a double strike. She had a copy of his map. He walked to the table. She didn't look up, but her hand moved slightly, pushing the satchel closed over the other papers before she addressed the map directly. A woman who had learned to be careful with what she showed. "That's my work," Abel said. She looked up then. "You're Abel Morgan, the surveyor." "Innkeeper," he said, "among other things. The markings are yours." She turned the map a quarter and pointed to the elevation notation beside the 3rd wayhouse marker. "You use a modified Keldish grid. Only 2 active surveyors in the eastern borderlands use it, Morgan and a man named Thisk, who I'm told is dead." "Thisk is dead," Abel confirmed. He pulled out the chair opposite her and after a pause that acknowledged both the question and the choice, sat down. "Why do you have a copy of my Pilgrim Road survey?" She looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then she made a decision he could see her making, a deliberate unlocking. "I'm traveling the Pilgrim Road to Arrendal," she said. "Not for the shrines. I'm carrying a treaty proposition from the Doomhammer clan to the Council of 3 Shrines." She paused. "An alliance proposal." "I know who the Doomhammer clan is," Abel said carefully. "Most people do. There was a wryness in her voice that was neither proud nor bitter. The Doomhammer clan controlled the mountain passes north of Keld's Crossing. They were one of the oldest and most respected orc clans in the region, known for being formidable in war and surprisingly honorable in commerce. They were also known for being fiercely independent, which made the word alliance sit strangely in the same sentence. The Council of Three Shrines controls the southern pilgrimage routes, she continued. Those routes pass through Doomhammer territory for 40 miles. The clan and the council have been at a cold standoff for 12 years over toll rights and rite of passage. There are pilgrims who have died in that standoff, some killed by clan enforcers who read aggression into prayer groups, some robbed by bandits taking advantage of a zone with no authority. She set the charcoal down. The clan elder wants it resolved. I'm the one carrying the resolution. Why you? Another measuring look. Because I'm the best negotiator the clan has who can also survive the Pilgrim Road alone. He glanced at her arm. She followed his gaze. That was bandits at the Keld's Crossing ford. 3 of them, I handled it. I can see that, he said. She handled it well enough to be alive and eating his stew, which spoke for itself. What does the treaty look like? She considered him. Why do you want to know? Because I'm the man who surveyed that road, he said. I spent 8 months on it. I know every wayhouse between here and Arrendal. I know which fords are crossable and which are traps in autumn rain. I know where the Doomhammer patrols run and where the bandit camps are. He paused. And I'm planning to go back in the spring to update the survey. If there's a treaty in the works, I'd rather know about it before I walk into a patrol I don't recognize. Zora Doomhammer looked at him across the table in the low candlelight, and there was something in her expression that he couldn't quite name, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Like she had walked into a room expecting one kind of space and found another. The treaty, she said, includes a marriage of alliance. He waited. Between a Doomhammer representative and a member of the Council of Three Shrines or a recognized partner of the Council's choosing. She picked up the charcoal again, turned it in her fingers without writing anything. The clan elder chose me as the representative. And the Council's choice. That's what I'm traveling to find out. Her voice was level, uninflected, the voice of someone recounting a weather report. But something in the set of her jaw said it cost her something to say it that flatly. The elder believes a political marriage will seal the agreement in a way that coin contracts won't. He's probably right, he usually is. Abel looked at the map between them. He looked at the woman across it. Are you all right with that? He asked. She blinked, like no one had asked her before. It's necessary, she said. That's not what I asked. A silence stretched between them, longer than most silences he shared with people he'd known for years. She was looking at him with those amber eyes, and whatever she found there made her shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, so small he almost missed it, but he didn't. No, she said quietly, I'm not all right with it. But I'm the one who goes where she's needed, so I'll go. He looked at the map again. The Pilgrim Road wound its way south in neat lines and careful notation. He had walked every mile of it. He knew the 2 wayhouses between here and the first Doomhammer patrol that were run by men who would not rent a room to an orc woman, the ford that had turned in the autumn rains and could not be crossed without a guide who knew the stones. He knew the shrine at Haven's Pass where bandits in priests' robes had been operating for the last 2 seasons. He reached over and turned the map so it faced him, and he picked up the charcoal. Let me show you something, he said. And then they were both bent over the map together in the firelight, and the hour got late, and neither of them noticed. He woke up the next morning early, the way he always did, before the kitchen fire had caught properly and the light was still gray and cold through the eastward windows. He washed his face and came downstairs expecting an empty common room. She was still at the table. She'd fallen asleep there, her head resting on her folded arms on the map, the charcoal loose in one slack hand, the amber eyes shut, her breathing slow and deep. The fire had burned low overnight, but the coals were still warm, and she had drawn her cloak around herself at some point in the small hours, so she was not cold. She looked younger in sleep, less defended. Abel stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment. He was not, by nature, a man who formed attachments quickly. He was 32 years old, had spent the better part of 8 years as a traveling surveyor and the 3 years since running the Waystone, and he had lived most of that time in a kind of organized solitude that he had told himself suited him. He was not lonely, he had told himself. He had work he found meaningful, a warm building, and decent enough company when the road brought it. But standing at the bottom of his stairs looking at Zora Doomhammer asleep over his map, he was aware of something stirring in his chest that he did not have a ready word for. Something like recognition. Something like the feeling he got when he came over a ridge, and the landscape below matched the shape he'd been carrying in his head. The satisfaction of something fitting exactly where it belonged. He went to the kitchen and built up the fire. He made coffee, the real kind, from the small bag of Keldish roast he kept for himself in special circumstances, though he could not have said precisely which circumstance this was. He made bread because it was morning and that was what mornings called for. He scrambled eggs from the 4 hens in the yard. He sliced the cold, smoked pork from the previous night's larder. When he came back with the tray, she was awake. She was sitting up straight, the charcoal still in her hand, looking at the map she'd slept on with an expression somewhere between embarrassed and calculating working out. He thought, whether to be annoyed at herself or at him for witnessing it. He set the tray on the table. "I didn't mean to sleep here," she said. "I know." He poured the coffee. "You were tired." She looked at the food. She looked at him. The same measuring look as the night before, but something had shifted in the calibration. "You don't have to feed me." "I know that too." He sat down across from her, same chair as the night before. "I wanted to." She picked up the coffee, and when she drank it and her eyes widened slightly at the quality of the roast, the expression on her face was so unguarded and so genuine that something happened to the architecture of his chest. They ate breakfast over the map. She told him in pieces about the clan elder, a man named Gorak, her uncle by marriage, who had led the Doomhammer clan for 23 years and who was, by her account, simultaneously the most infuriating and most principled man she had ever known. She told him about the 12-year standoff, the 2 incidents where pilgrims had died, the growing pressure from the wider Orc Council to either formalize the road agreement or abandon the territorial claim entirely. She told him the alliance marriage had been Gorak's idea, and that she had argued against it for 3 months before accepting it, because the alternative was the clan losing the mountain passes entirely to a southern coalition that would be far less careful about pilgrims and far more interested in revenue. He told her about the Pilgrim Road in return, the real road, the lived-in version that didn't appear in any official document. The Wayhouse keeper at the 3rd marker who was secretly running a message service for the shrine bandits at Haven's Pass. The ford at mile 42 that looked passable and wasn't, not in October. The small shrine village of Dusk's Well where the keeper was a woman named Mara who would house any traveler without question, orc or human or otherwise, and whose hospitality was genuine. She listened with her whole body the way very few people listen, turned toward him still, the amber eyes steady, filing everything away. "You know the road better than anyone," she said when he finished. "I drew it." "You walked it," she corrected. "That's different. Anyone can draw a map from other maps." "You surveyed it by foot, mostly by foot, 2 sections by boat on the river legs. I need someone who knows those sections." She said it carefully, picking the words like she was choosing stones to step on over uncertain ground. "The Council of 3 Shrines is expecting me in 6 weeks. The road I'd have to travel alone has 3 stretches I'm uncertain about and 2 I know to be actively dangerous." A pause. "I'm not asking for charity. I can pay a guide's rate." He looked at her across the empty breakfast plates and the marked-up map between them. He'd been planning to spend the autumn at the Waystone and go back out in the spring. The inn didn't run itself, but his cook Hilda could manage the day-to-day for a few weeks, and he'd left her in charge before when survey work had called him early. He'd been meaning to scout the Pilgrim Road again anyway, wanting to update the Wayhouse records after the reports of banditry. None of that was why he said yes. He said yes because she told him she was walking towards something she wasn't all right with, and she was going to do it anyway, and he found he wanted to walk that road with her for as long as the road ran. "Keep your coin," he said. "I was planning to survey the road this season anyway. You can travel with me." She studied him. "Why?" "The guide rate I'd charge you would be fair, and you clearly need a good guide." And he paused, holding her gaze. "I'd like to keep talking to you." It was more honest than he usually was with people he'd known for 8 hours, and he knew it, and he didn't take it back. She held his gaze for a long moment, and then the corner of her mouth curved up just one side, the right, the side without the scar, in an expression so small and so genuine that it changed the whole room. "All right, Abel Morgan," she said. "We leave in 3 days when the ford clears." He nodded. He felt the way he felt when he stood on a ridge and looked down at the country he was going to survey, and understood that he was going into good, hard country, and he was the right man for it. 3 days, he agreed. He spent those 3 days setting the waystone in order. Hilda came in early on the second day, a stout woman of 45 who had been his cook and part-time manager for 2 years, and who made no comment about anything she didn't consider strictly her business, which Abel had always valued enormously. He gave her the keys, the supply ledger, and 2 weeks of operating coin, and she took them all without asking a single question he didn't want to answer. Zora spent the 3 days doing what travelers do when they're forced into stillness, mending gear, resting, eating regular meals with an efficiency that suggested she had been running lean for some time. She took her meals at the corner table. She spent long hours with the map. She did not talk to the other guests beyond what courtesy required, but she was courteous, something he noticed because it was deliberate, because she was in a space where she knew not everyone was comfortable with her presence, and she was making the choice to offer ease rather than demand it. On the second evening, one of the Pilgrim Road surveyors, a lean man named Cotter who had been watching her with a professional interest he was clearly trying to suppress, finally sat down at her table with a question about a discrepancy in the elevation records for the 5th Wayhouse approach. She answered it. Then he asked a second question. Within 20 minutes, they were deep in a technical argument about the reliability of Keldish grid notation in the high passes, and Abel, watching from the bar with a cloth in his hand and a sensation he had no name for, thought that there was something about watching her in her competence. The way her hands moved over the paper, the precision of her language, the way she made technical argument feel like conversation. That was one of the most attractive things he had ever witnessed. She caught him watching at one point and raised an eyebrow. He went back to polishing the bar. On the 3rd morning, the ford cleared. He came downstairs with his pack, his survey instruments in their leather case, and his heavy cloak. She was at the corner table with her travel satchel at her feet and the map already folded and packed, drinking the last of the coffee he'd left for her, and she looked up at him when he came down the stairs with an expression that was not quite a smile but contained all the ingredients of one. "Ready?" she said. "Ready," he said. They went out into the cold, clear morning together. The Pilgrim Road south of Crosswater was a genuine road, for the first 12 miles packed gravel laid over the old stone bed, maintained by the Wayhouse authorities as part of the Shrine Compact. Merchants used it. Pilgrims used it. The odd military patrol from Fort Keld used it. It had waymarkers every 2 miles and a public well at mile 6, and in summer it was, by the standards of the borderlands, almost comfortable. In October, in the aftermath of a hard rain, it was a study in the specific misery of mud that was too thin to walk on and too thick to walk through. And the two of them spent the first 2 hours not talking very much and instead concentrating on the physical work of moving through a saturated landscape with full packs. Around mile 7, where the road leveled onto a limestone shelf above the valley floor, the footing improved and they found their stride together. He walked fast for a human man, long legs, the economical pace of someone who had covered a great deal of ground over a long career. She walked faster naturally, her stride longer than his, and she adjusted without comment, settling into a pace that matched his, which he appreciated more than he said. "What do you know about the Council of Three Shrines?" she asked, somewhere around mile 10. "Officially or actually?" "Both." "Officially, a joint administrative body representing the three major shrines of the southern pilgrimage route, the Shrine of the Quiet River at Arrendal, the Standing Flame Shrine at Morrow, and the Forest Shrine at Dusk's Well. They govern the road, collect maintenance tithes, and arbitrate disputes between pilgrims and road users." He paused. "Actually, there are three families who have been splitting the tithe revenue for 60 years and who have a complicated relationship with the concept of change. The Quiet River family, the Arnolds, are the most powerful and the most resistant. The Standing Flame family, the Westers, are ambitious and would probably deal in good faith. The Forest Shrine family, the Dusks, are farmers who somehow ended up running a shrine and have more in common with orc land keepers than they probably know." She was quiet for a moment. "Who would they put forward as a marriage candidate?" The word marriage landed differently now that he knew what it meant for her personally. He kept his eyes on the road. "From the Arnolds, probably one of the second sons. They'd want the prestige of the alliance without risking a primary heir." He paused. "From the Westers, possibly someone ambitious enough to see it as an opportunity. The Dusks, honestly, I don't know. Mara Dusk runs the Wayhouse at Dusk's Well. She's a widow and she controls the Forest Shrine directly. She might do it herself." Zora made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "An orc woman and a human widow. The council would love that." "They'd survive it," he said, and the dryness of his tone made her actual laugh come loose, short, real, deeper than expected, a sound that moved through him like the first note of a song he'd forgotten he knew. He kept walking. He was smiling at the road, and he was fairly sure she could see it. The first serious Wayhouse stop was at mile 15, a stone building called Thornwell that was maintained by an elderly keeper named Ossick and his daughter. Abel had stayed here before and had decent history with Ossick, who was the uncomplicated kind of pragmatist. If you paid, you were welcome, and the personal opinions of other guests were their own problem. They arrived in the early afternoon with 4 miles still in their legs and the sky promising another hour of decent light. Ossick was in the yard splitting wood when they came up the road, and he looked at the two of them, the human surveyor he knew and the orc woman he clearly didn't, and then he looked back at the wood and split another log. 2 rooms or 1, he said without looking up. 2, Abel said, the same moment Zora said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. Ossick's daughter, who was 12 and utterly fearless, appeared from behind the wood pile and stared at Zora with undisguised fascination. "Are you really an orc?" she asked. "Yes," Zora said. "Can I see your tusks?" Zora looked at Abel with an expression that contained more raw bemusement than anything he'd seen on her face yet. He shrugged helplessly. She turned back to the child and opened her mouth slightly, showing the short curved tusks with their bronze caps. "Brilliant," the child said. "Do they hurt when you eat?" "No." "Do they get in the way when you kiss someone?" Abel looked very carefully at a point on the barn wall. "Harold," Ossick said without emphasis. "Go start the supper." She went, at length, casting one more look over her shoulder that was everything 12-year-old intellectual hunger looked like in physical form. They were given the 2 rooms at the top of the Wayhouse, which were small and clean, side by side with a shared washroom between. Abel lay on his narrow bed that night looking at the ceiling and listening to the sound of rain returning on the roof, and through the wall he could hear the faint sounds of Zora settling, the boots coming off, the pack set down, the small distinct movements of a person making a temporary space into a night's shelter. He was aware of her presence on the other side of the wall the way you're aware of a fire in a dark room, not aggressively, not uncomfortably, but in the way that warmth works, that it simply is and you are better for it. He fell asleep thinking about the look on her face when the 12-year-old asked about kissing. The next morning brought clear skies and fast walking, and they made good time through miles 16 to 28. The road here cut through the low hill country, passing through two small farming villages where Abel had contacts, and where Zora drew looks ranging from curious to hostile, which she met with the same level, untroubled expression she appeared to use for everything she had categorized as beneath response. At the second village, the market square was doing its weekly business, and Abel stopped to buy provisions, dried meat, hard cheese, the dense wayfarer's bread that kept for a week, while Zora stood at the edge of the market and watched the activity with an expression that Abel had begun to recognize as her version of engagement, the way she cataloged everything around her without the cataloging showing on her face. A man at a stall nearby was watching her, with the quality of attention that did not stay attention for long. He was thick-necked, carrying a pike across his back that was 2 sizes too large for the context of a market day, and he had 2 friends behind him of similar disposition. "You need something," he said to her loudly in the tone that means the opposite. Zora did not look at him. "Looking at you, asking you a question," the man said louder. Abel was 20 feet away at the provision stall, money in his hand, and he turned and looked. She still hadn't looked at the man. But her hand had moved just slightly to the hilt of the left blade, not gripping it, just resting there, a marker. "She's with me," Abel said, and his voice in the open air of the market was quiet enough that a few heads turned simply because of the quality of it, the complete absence of heat, which somehow read louder than heat. The man looked at him, looked at the orc woman, made the calculation that a man with a surveyor's pack was probably not worth a morning's trouble, and made it correctly. He went back to his stall. Zora still hadn't looked. When Abel came back with the provisions, she took her share of the pack weight without comment, and they walked out of the village, and somewhere around the quarter-mile mark she said, very quietly, "Thank you." "He was going to make a scene," Abel said. "I didn't want to deal with the noise." "That's not why you did it," she said. He looked at the road ahead. "No," he agreed. "It's not." They walked in silence for a comfortable while after that. The shrine village of Dusk's Well appeared on the second evening, tucked into a fold of low hills where a spring ran year-round and the trees had been kept back to create a clearing around the old forest shrine. It was not a large place, 15 or 20 buildings, a wayhouse, a stable, the shrine itself built from old gray stone and hung with dried flowers and carved wood figures. But it had a quality of settled peace that the road had been lacking, and Abel felt his shoulders come down as they walked through the gate. Mara Dusk was in the wayhouse yard when they arrived, directing 2 young men who were patching the roof. She was a woman of 50, built compact and solid, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of face that had been weathered into something stronger than it had started as. She looked down from where she was supervising the roof work and saw Abel and Zora in the yard below. "Morgan," she said, "thought you were settled at Crosswater." "Survey work," he said. Her eyes moved to Zora with the professional assessment of a woman who had housed travelers on the Pilgrimage Road for 20 years. "Doomhammer clan," she said, not unkindly. Zora's eyes sharpened slightly. "How do you know?" "The bronze rings. Doomhammer clan marked them in the hair braids." She climbed down from the ladder with the confidence of someone who'd been climbing things all her life. "Mara Dusk, this is my wayhouse and my shrine." She held out a hand to Zora, human custom adapted to orc context. She offered it palm down, the less aggressive gesture. "I've been expecting someone from your clan. You knew we were coming. I knew the clan would send someone eventually. The treaty proposal has been sitting with my family's portion of the council for 4 months. She looked at Abel. "You're guiding her in. Traveling together," he said. Mara Dusk looked between them with an expression that was somewhere between knowing and professional. "2 rooms," she said. "Come on in." They sat up late that night around Mara's kitchen table, the 3 of them, and what unfolded was the most useful 3-hour conversation Abel had attended in years. Mara spoke frankly about the council's internal politics. The Arnolds were resistant primarily because they'd been skimming the toll revenue, and a formal treaty would require audited accounts. The Westers were ambitious and would support the alliance if approached correctly. The Dusk family, meaning Mara herself and her 2 brothers, were inclined to support it on its merits. She spoke with equal frankness about the marriage clause. "The council will want to see it as a symbol," she said. "A visible gesture that the alliance is real. They're not going to support a marriage that looks forced." She looked at Zora. "Can you walk into Arrendal and convince them the marriage candidate is willing?" Zora was quiet for a moment. "I can carry the treaty. I can represent the clan. I can negotiate." A pause. "Whether I can convince them I'm willing is a different problem." "It'll show," Mara said simply. "People can tell." Her gaze moved between them again in that same assessing way, and then she stood up and collected the mugs. "Get some sleep. Ford at mile 32 is clear in the morning but backs up by afternoon." After Mara had gone upstairs, Abel and Zora sat for a moment in the kitchen in the dying firelight. "She's right that it'll show," he said quietly. Zora turned the empty mug in her hands. "I know. What does your uncle say about the candidate? Does he have someone specific in mind?" "He says it should be whoever the council proposes that the clan finds tolerable." She set the mug down. "His words were that I should find the best outcome for the clan. He meant it as freedom. It feels like," she stopped. "A task without a map," he offered. She looked at him. The firelight was doing something warm to her sage-green skin, to the amber of her eyes, and she was looking at him with an expression he was becoming familiar with, the one where she was seeing him, really seeing him, not the surveyor or the innkeeper but the specific person he was. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." "I know that feeling," he said. "It's not a bad place to be once you stop fighting it." "What does that mean?" "It means that sometimes the best maps are the ones you make while you're walking." He held her gaze. "Not before." A long silence settled between them, charged in a way that made him want to either move toward her or go to bed, and since one of those options felt reckless and the other felt cowardly, he sat very still. She solved the problem by standing up, taking both mugs to the wash basin, and then turning in the doorway and looking at him. "Good night, Abel," she said, and her voice had a quality in the low light that it hadn't had before, softer at the edges, like something she'd stopped keeping at a controlled distance. "Good night, Zora," he said. He sat alone in the kitchen for another 10 minutes looking at the fire before he went to bed. The ford at mile 32 was clear in the morning, exactly as Mara had said, and they crossed into Doomhammer territory on the other side. He'd been in Doomhammer territory before, on the original survey, and he knew it the way you know a place that has set terms with you, clearly marked, fairly enforced. The patrols were real but not aggressive. The waymarkers were maintained in both human and orc notation. The road was, if anything, better kept here than in the stretch north of Dusk's Well, because the Doomhammer clan had an economic interest in pilgrims arriving at the southern shrines alive, and in condition to spend money at the associated markets. What changed was the attitude of the road itself toward Zora. In the northern stretch she had been an anomaly, something that required management. Here, the first patrol, they encountered 2 orc warriors on the road. Long spears and clan-marked armor saw her and stood aside, and one of them touched his chest with a fist in the Doomhammer salute. She returned it without breaking stride, and there was something about watching her in her own context that changed the whole register of the road. She was not on borrowed ground anymore. Here she was known, at least by reputation, and the road responded to her accordingly. "Your clan maintained the road improvements," Abel said, noting the fresh gravel at a particularly boggy section. "We have an interest in maintaining it," she said. "A road that kills pilgrims is a road without revenue. Practical. The clan elder is nothing if not practical." She paused. "He'd like you, probably. He respects mapmakers." Abel looked at the mountain range coming clear on the horizon, the high gray peaks of the Doomhammer passes. "Does the alliance marriage candidate need to be from the council's official families, or is it a negotiable category?" She glanced at him. "The treaty text says a recognized partner of the council's choosing. It's intentionally open language." A pause. "Why?" He looked at the mountains. "Just thinking about the map," he said, which was both true and not entirely what he meant, and he suspected she knew the difference. They camped that night at the way house at Mile 38, which was run by a quiet orc family who gave them a shared common room with a fire and food without ceremony. The other travelers staying that night were 3 human pilgrims heading south and an orc merchant going north, and the mixing of species in the small fire-lit room had the natural quality of things that happen in in-between places, where the road itself is the common ground. After the meal, the pilgrims and the merchant went to their respective blankets, and Abel sat by the fire updating his survey notes. The elevation readings, the ford condition, the road surface notes, by the light of a single candle. Zora sat beside him and watched him work with an attention that he was aware of the way you're aware of the sun on the back of your neck. "You're very careful about the small details," she said. "The small details are what the map is for," he said. "Anyone can note that a ford exists. Not everyone notes that it's crossable between the 2nd and 8th hour and dangerous at all other times. Who taught you to survey?" "A man named Aldrich Bain, dead 6 years now. He was the best surveyor in the eastern borderlands for 30 years, and he was terrible at almost everything else and completely aware of it." He smiled at the paper. "He used to say that the world didn't need him to have an opinion, it needed him to measure accurately. But you have opinions." "I have opinions," he agreed. "I just learned to keep them for situations where they're more useful than measurements." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's your opinion of me?" He looked up from the survey notes. She was watching him from across the low table, her knees drawn up, her chin resting on one hand, and the amber eyes were direct and without performance, asking a real question, expecting a real answer. He set down the pen. "I think you're one of the most competent and honest people I've met on this road or any other," he said. "I think you're walking towards something you didn't choose with more grace than most people manage with things they did choose. And I think you're considerably more interesting than you allow people to see." He held her gaze. "That's my opinion." The fire crackled. She uncurled from her position in a single smooth movement and crossed the small space between them, 2 steps, maybe 3, and sat down beside him, close enough that her shoulder was against his, warm and present and deliberate. She looked at the survey notes. "Show me what you're working on," she said. He showed her. And somewhere between the elevation readings and the ford timing notes, her hand found his on the table, unhurried, certain, and she laced her fingers through his and held on, and he let her, and neither of them mentioned it, and the fire burned down around them like it had somewhere important to be. The ambush happened at the Havens Pass Shrine Complex on day 5. Abel had known it was coming in the way that field surveyors develop a 6th sense for the wrongness of a scene. The way the pilgrim offerings at the shrine entrance were undisturbed, but the candles inside were unlit, which meant no pilgrim keeper. The way the 2 men near the gate were dressed in shrine keepers' robes that were too new, too clean, no road dust or candle wax. The way they were watching the road from the wrong angle, not south, where pilgrims came from, but north, where travelers with good packs came from. He slowed, putting a hand on Zora's arm. She had already clocked it, of course she had. "Shrine bandits," he said quietly. "At least 2 at the gate, more inside probably." "5, she said. 2 at the gate, 1 on the roof of the keeper's house, 2 more in the side passage behind the main building. She had catalogued them in the space of a single glance. "They're waiting for us to go in. We can go around. The road goes through the shrine complex." She looked at the shrine at the gate at the drop beyond the outer wall that went 40 feet down to the gorge floor. "Going around means the gorge path, which is 3 hours in deteriorating light. Or we deal with it." She looked at him. "Stay behind me," she said. He had a surveyor's folding staff, 6 feet of iron-capped wood that could be used as a walking aid or a measuring rod, and in a situation like this was a decent weapon if you knew how to use it, which he did. He was not a soldier and had never been a soldier, but 8 years of walking the borderlands alone had given him a practical working knowledge of how to manage himself in a confrontation. But he saw her move, and he understood in the course of the next 90 seconds what it meant to be in Zora Doomhammer's physical world. The bandits came from the position she'd called, and she came to meet them in the open space of the shrine courtyard, with a quality of movement that was not fast the way water is fast, but fast the way certainty is fast. No wasted motion, no hesitation, direct and purposeful as a thrown stone. The two blades came out, short and balanced, and she moved through them as if the script had been written ahead of time and she'd memorized her part. What happened with the largest of the bandits? The man on the roof who dropped down behind her, a big man, broad-chested, carrying a maul, was the thing that stopped the world. He was twice her weight and had the height and the weapon for it, and he swung the maul in a horizontal arc that should have been impossible to stop with anything short of a stone wall. She caught it. She caught the handle of the maul with one hand, planted her feet, and stopped the swing dead. The impact rang through the courtyard stones like a hammer on an anvil. The man staggered forward into his own arrested momentum. She took the maul away from him with one hand and set him down on the courtyard stones with the other, hard enough that the air went out of him in one concussive breath, and he did not get up. The Pilgrim Road surveyors, Cotter's group, who had been 3 hours behind them, arrived at the shrine gate at that exact moment. The courtyard had 6 people in it. 5 bandits, 4 of whom were no longer standing, one of whom was in the process of deciding not to be standing. Zora Doomhammer stood in the middle of them with the borrowed maul in her hand and the short blades at her sides, not breathing hard, and the lone remaining bandit looked at her and put his hands up. The silence that followed was the silence of people recalibrating their understanding of what was possible. Cotter, at the gate, looked at the courtyard, looked at the orc woman, looked at Abel, who was standing to one side with his iron-capped staff and a very specific expression. "We should make a notation in the survey about Haven's Pass," Cotter said finally. "Already noted," Abel said. Zora turned to look at him across the courtyard, the last low light catching her face, the bronze tips of her hair rings, the amber of her eyes. She was unhurt. She looked like herself, exactly herself, standing in the middle of what she'd just done with the total unself-consciousness of a woman who had never needed to perform her own capability. He had never in his life been as attracted to another person as he was in that exact moment. He held her gaze across the courtyard, and whatever was on his face was apparently legible because the corner of her mouth curved up, just the one side, the right, the side without the scar, and she handed the maul to the surrendered bandit and said, "Throw it in the gorge," and then she walked to where Abel was standing. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm perfect," he said, which was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in months. They reported the bandits to the shrine authority at the next wayhouse south, where Cotter's group corroborated everything, and the authority dispatched a road patrol, which was the correct and efficient outcome. They spent the night at a clean wayhouse run by a no-nonsense woman who gave them adjacent rooms and excellent lamb stew. And if the woman noticed the way Abel and Zora moved through the common room as a unit, finishing each other's context, anticipating each other's positions, the particular navigational synchrony of people who had covered 100 miles together, she made no comment. After dinner, they were alone on the upper balcony of the wayhouse, looking south across the dark hill country toward the lights of Arrendal, which were visible on clear nights like a scatter of sparks in the valley. 3 days of road still ahead. "What happens when we get there?" he asked. "I present the treaty to the council." Her voice was quiet. "They accept or reject it. And the marriage clause." She was leaning on the balcony rail looking south, and she was quiet for longer than usual. "The marriage clause is what it is," she said finally. "I carry it as a term of the treaty. Whether the council proposes a candidate I can live with, what if they propose someone you can't?" She looked at him. "What if the candidate they propose is someone who is wrong for you?" he said. He was choosing words with the care of a man who was aware that the words mattered very much. "What are the terms? Can the clan representative reject the council's candidate?" "Theoretically." A pause. It would complicate the treaty considerably. But it's possible. Abel, she turned from the railing to face him, and her expression was more open than he had ever seen it, more present, the professional distance entirely absent. What are you asking me? He held her gaze. The starlight was clear and cold, and below them the road ran south, and he was a man who made maps and who understood that the places between things were just as real as the places on either end. I'm asking, he said carefully, whether the treaty language that says recognized partner of the council's choosing has any room in it. She was very still. Room for what? She said. For a surveyor, he said, who knows the road, who the Council of Three Shrines has on record as a recognized contractor, who could, theoretically, be considered a partner of the council's choosing. He held her gaze. For a man who has spent 6 days walking this road with you and is not interested in anyone else having the position. The silence stretched. It was not an empty silence. It was a silence that was very full. Abel Morgan, she said, and her voice had a different quality now, lower, almost careful. Are you proposing to insert yourself into a diplomatic marriage treaty as a solution to a political problem? I'm telling you, I don't want you to marry someone you can't live with, he said. And I'm telling you that I would not be someone you can't live with. He took one step closer. And I'm telling you that I knew it somewhere around the second morning when you were still at my table. She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched everything he'd come to recognize as her. The measuring amber eyes, the careful, deliberate strength of her, the warmth beneath the competence that she rationed so specifically and had been giving him in larger and larger portions as the miles had passed. He watched all of it shift, settle, decide. She crossed the 2 steps between them and kissed him. It was not tentative. It was not uncertain. It was the kiss of a woman who had decided, who had the courage of her convictions, and her hands came up to his face with the same directness she brought to everything, and he kissed her back with everything he had, which was more than he'd known was available, and the stars over the Pilgrim Road were very clear and very bright. When they finally separated, she was looking at him from a distance of roughly 6 inches, and her expression was the most open thing he had ever seen on any human or orc face. You are the most disarming man I have ever met, she said. I'm an innkeeper and a mapmaker, he said. I'm not supposed to be alarming. She laughed that deep, genuine laugh, the one that moved through him like light. You're dangerous, she said, just quietly. He held her face in his hands, looking at her properly, at the scar and the bronze rings and the amber eyes. I meant it, he said, all of it. I know, she said, that's the problem. No, he said, that's the solution. They arrived in Arrendal on the 7th day of the road, coming down out of the hill country into the valley city in the clear gold of late afternoon, when the shrine towers caught the light, and the Pilgrim Road proper dissolved into the wide stone streets of the city proper. Arrendal was a real city, 10,000 people, a market district, a proper inn with glass windows, the spires of the 3 shrine administrative buildings visible from the road. Zora knew the city. She had been here before, years ago, on clan business. She moved through it with purpose, and he walked beside her, and the city absorbed them as cities absorb arrivals, with the quick calculating disinterest of a place that has seen everything. The Council of 3 Shrines kept their joint office in a building adjacent to the quiet river shrine, which was a considerable structure of gray stone and carved water imagery that Abel had surveyed once, and found architecturally impressive and administratively chaotic. They sent a message ahead requesting a meeting and checked into the inn across the square 2 rooms, because they were still being careful with what was announced, though the care felt increasingly artificial. The meeting was the following morning. Abel accompanied her, not as a formal party to the treaty negotiation, but as her surveyor and road guide, which the council steward accepted without question, because surveyors were invisible in the way of useful technical people. He sat at the back of the formal room while Zora stood at the long table facing the 5 council members, and he watched her work. She was extraordinary. She presented the Doomhammer treaty proposal with the precision of someone who had spent months internalizing every clause and counterargument. She had the survey records, his survey records, to support every factual claim about road conditions, toll points, and the pilgrims who had died in the gap zones. She had economic analysis that demonstrated the revenue potential of a functioning treaty versus the continuing cost of the status quo. She had the formal endorsement of two of the three major orc councils of the eastern borderlands. The Arrendals, the dominant family, pushed back on the toll revenue clauses, as expected. She had anticipated it and had a counterproposal ready that protected the core revenue stream while requiring transparent accounting. It was, Abel thought, a better negotiating position than anything the Arrendal family had probably seen in 20 years. By the second hour, the Wester representative was nodding. By the third, Mara Dusk's eldest brother, who had traveled from Duskwell for the meeting, was drafting alternative wording on a clause that had been sticking. The marriage clause came up in the fourth hour. The Arrendal patriarch, an old man named Halbert, white-haired and wearing his seniority like a weapon, leaned forward. The marriage of alliance. The treaty requires the clan representative and a recognized partner of the council's choosing. Who does your clan propose on your side? I am the clan's representative, Zora said. The clan elder designated me as the marriage candidate as well as the treaty carrier. And the council's choice. Halbert looked at his colleagues. Would propose my nephew, Aldrich Arrendal. I'd like to offer an alternative candidate for the council's consideration, Zora said. The room went very quiet. The treaty language specifies a recognized partner of the council's choosing, she said. The Council of Three Shrines has a recognized contractual relationship with a surveyor who mapped the Pilgrim Road, the road this treaty governs. His maps are the official record of the route. He is known to all three shrine families. He is present in this room. She paused. Abel Morgan. Every head in the room turned to where he was sitting at the back. He rose from his chair. Halbert Arrendal was looking at him with an expression that moved from surprise through calculation to something more guarded. Morgan surveys for us, yes, he said slowly. He's not. He is human, recognized by the council as a professional contractor, and willing to stand as partner in this alliance, Zora said. The treaty language does not specify the candidate must be a member of a shrine family. It specifies recognition by the council. She held Halbert's gaze. Do you recognize Abel Morgan? A pause. We do, said the Wester representative, because he was ambitious and he could see which way the morning was going. We do, said Mara Dusk's brother, because he was practical. Halbert Arrendal looked at Abel for a long moment, and Abel stood at the back of the room with the quiet steadiness of a man who had walked 100 miles and knew exactly where he was standing and why. The road survey you produced, Halbert said. It's been accurate every time we've used it. I'm careful about the small details, Abel said. Another pause. Halbert was old and resistant and not accustomed to having the room move without him, but he was also a man who had stayed in power for 40 years by reading the wind correctly. He looked at Zora. He looked at Abel. He looked at the draft treaty on the table in front of him. Very well, he said. The council recognizes Abel Morgan as a viable candidate for the alliance partnership. He picked up his pen. Let's discuss the clause wording. Abel met Zora's eyes across the length of the room. The corner of her mouth curved up, just the right side, the side without the scar. He exhaled for what felt like the first time in 4 hours. The formal signing took place 2 days later in the public square in front of the Quiet River Shrine because the council understood the value of witnesses. It was a real ceremony, a public reading of the treaty terms, the affixing of official seals, a spoken declaration from both the clan representative and the council before the assembled crowd of pilgrims, merchants, shrine workers, and Arrendal citizens who had gathered for the event. The crowd was mixed, human and orc and a scattering of other travelers, and it was not a perfectly comfortable crowd. There were faces in it that held the specific set of people who were working out whether they were watching something historic or something wrong, and in some cases both, and that discomfort was real. What changed the room, which is to say, the square, and the mood of everything in it, happened during the declaration. The treaty required both parties to name their intent publicly. Zora Doomhammer stood at the formal table in the October sunlight and named the clan's intent with the precision and authority of someone who had carried it for months. Then she named her personal intent, which was the part that had not been scripted. "The clan elder gave me open language," she said, speaking now to the crowd rather than to the council at the table, and her voice carried the way voices carry when they are not performing but simply true. "He told me to find the best outcome. For 12 years, this road has been a place where people died because two groups who should have been partners had decided to be obstacles instead. I walked this road with a man who mapped it honestly, who noted every ford and every danger without agenda, who turned toward the problem instead of away from it." She paused. "That's the kind of partnership this alliance is built on. Not obligation, not politics, honest work toward the same thing." She held the crowd's attention, the whole of it, the discomfort and the curiosity and the witnesses all together, and her amber eyes were clear and direct. "I am Zora Doomhammer, and I name Abel Morgan as my partner and my choice. Not because the treaty requires it, because he is who I choose." The square was quiet. Then Mara Dusk's brother started clapping, which was the right move from a diplomat's son, and the Wester representative joined him. And then the pilgrims who had been the whole point of the treaty all along, and the sound moved through the square the way sound moves through water, spreading until even the discomfort resolved into something that was not hostility anymore. Abel stood at the table and added his hand and his name to the treaty document, and when he looked up, Zora was looking at him the way she had been at the beginning, when she had walked through his door and stood in the rain with her hand near her blade, braced for refusal. Except now the armor was gone. All of it. She was just looking at him direct, warm, certain, the way she looked when she'd already made up her mind. He walked the 3 steps around the table and stood in front of her. "You said not because the treaty requires it," he said quietly. "No," she said, "not because of the treaty." He took her hand. Her fingers closed around his, certain. "Good," he said. They stayed in Arrendal for a week after the signing, while the formal documentation was processed and the clan notified by fast courier. Abel spent part of that week in the council archives updating the Pilgrim Road survey with the new information he'd gathered on the journey south, the ford conditions, the Havens Pass notation, the wayhouse changes. He also produced a new survey of the road segments through Doomhammer territory that the clan had been maintaining, incorporating the improvements they'd made. The council paid him for it, which was entirely appropriate, and the Wester representative shook his hand with the enthusiasm of someone who could see an ongoing professional relationship developing. Zora spent the week in meetings with the Arrendal family, negotiating the administrative details of the treaty implementation, which was the harder and less romantic part of the work, and which she did with the same focused competence that she brought to everything. In the evenings they walked the city together, the shrines lit and the market stalls open late for the autumn festival season, and there was something wonderful and slightly disorienting about moving through a city as a pair, as us rather than 2 separate people making separate calculations. She took his arm in the market district, unself-conscious, proprietary in the best way, the gesture of a woman who had decided and was not shy about the deciding. He found himself doing the thing he had not done in years, thinking forward, thinking about the Waystone in terms of we rather than I, thinking about the spring survey in terms of company. "The clan elder is going to want to meet you," she said one evening over supper at the inn, with the easy quality that things in the future had begun to have between them. "I know. He's going to be terrifying. I've been terrified by weather and terrain for 8 years, he said. "I'll manage an uncle." She looked at him with those amber eyes across the supper table, warm and amused. He's going to ask you approximately 60 questions about your professional qualifications and your income and your plans. My professional qualifications are documented. My income is modest but stable. My plans include you. She reached across the table and took his hand, and it fit the same way it always had, certain and right, her fingers through his. My plans include you, she said, echoing it back to him with a quality in her voice that was both confirmation and declaration. Then we're in agreement, he said. We're in agreement, she said. On the day they left Arrendal, the road north was clear and cold and brilliant, the autumn morning doing its best work on the hill country, every tree in the process of becoming its most dramatic version. Abel had his survey pack and his rolled maps. Zora had her satchel and her travel leathers and the clan's official copy of the signed treaty, sealed in its courier tube. They stopped at the city's northern gate and looked back at Arrendal one final time, the shrine towers catching the morning light, the square where the signing had taken place empty now but charged still with the sense of something that had happened there. The road back is 10 days, he said, with the fords in better shape now. 8 if we push, she said. We don't have to push. She looked at him sidelong. No, she said, we don't. They walked north, and the road was familiar now, already a territory they shared, and the conversation between them had the ease of people who have run out of surface and are working in the deeper registers, trading thoughts and memories and preferences and observations without performance, the way people do when they are completely comfortable with each other, which is the rarest thing the world offers, and they had found it here, on a road that had needed mapping. Between two people who had been moving toward each other without knowing it, like rivers meeting at a confluence that was marked on no existing chart. He mapped her, in the way he mapped everything carefully, honestly, with attention to the small details. The way she laughed with her whole body when something genuinely delighted her. The way she solved problems in silence and announced the solution without the working. The way she reached for him in the small hours of a shared wayhouse fire, not with urgency, but with the settled certainty of someone claiming what was hers, and fell asleep against his shoulder with the bronze rings in her braid catching the low light. She mapped him too, in her way. She catalogued the quiet courage of him, the specific patient strength of a man who did hard things without drama and who showed his care through action rather than announcement. She catalogued the way he always knew where the warmth was and moved toward it, the way he listened with his full attention, the way he looked at her, not despite who she was, not past who she was, but at her, directly and willingly, as if she was exactly the territory he'd been hoping to find. At dusk's well, Mara came out to the yard when they arrived and looked at them and said good with the satisfaction of a woman whose read on things had been confirmed, and gave them a single room without asking, and dinner that was markedly better than anything else she served that week. At Thornwell, Ossic's 12-year-old daughter appeared from around the barn, looked at them, looked at their hands linked, and said, "I knew it," with the authority of someone who had never doubted. "You could not possibly have known it," Zora said. "We'd been traveling for 6 days when you met us." "You were looking at each other," the girl said, with devastating simplicity. "People who look at each other like that always end up together." She ran off before anyone could respond to this, and Abel and Zora stood in the yard of the Thornwell Wayhouse looking at each other. And then the laugh that came loose from her was the biggest one he'd heard yet, rich and warm and completely undefended, and he thought it was the best sound the Pilgrim Road had ever carried. The Waystone Inn appeared on the horizon of the 10th day out of Arrendal in the way familiar places always do, smaller than memory and larger in meaning. The stone walls and the smoke from the chimney, and the hanging sign visible from the last ridge before the road dropped into the valley. Crosswater spread below it, the village itself beginning to wake up in the late afternoon, smoke from evening fires, the sound of the blacksmith's hammer coming faint on the wind. Abel stopped at the ridge crest and looked at it. 8 years he'd been running the Waystone, and he'd never stood on this ridge and thought of it as something to be returned to, specifically, with anticipation. It had always just been the place he came back to between surveys, the place that kept the rain off. It was different now. Zora stood beside him, looking down at the valley. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said. "You've been imagining it. You talk about it," she said. The specific way people talk about the place they mean when they say home. She glanced at him. "I was curious." He looked at the inn. He looked at the village. He looked at the road that led from the ridge down into Crosswater's main street, which was the same road that the Waystone's front door opened onto. "I want to be honest about something," he said. She waited. "Crosswater is not Arrendal," he said. "It's a village of 400 people on a Pilgrim Road, and it has people in it who will be less gracious than Mara Dusk and more gracious than Den Varley, and it will take time." He looked at her. "I'm not pretending it will be easy. I've been walking the borderlands alone for 6 years," she said. "I'm not afraid of a village." "I know," he held her gaze. "I'm just telling you that I know it won't be perfect, and I'm still asking." She stepped in front of him, and the amber eyes were warm and direct and sure. "You stood between me and Den Varley on the first night," she said. "Without knowing me, without any reason other than that it was right." She put her hand on his chest, over the front of his jacket, flat and certain. "That's who you are. I've had 8 years of borderlands and cold wayhouses and carrying hard things alone, and I've met exactly one person in all of it who made me want to stop walking." Her hand pressed slightly. "I'm asking too." He covered her hand with his. The ridge wind moved through the grass around them, cold and clear, and below them the Waystone smoke rose steady. "Then let's go home," he said. She nodded once. He took her hand and they walked down off the ridge together. The village watched them come in. That was the truth of small places. They watched, they noted, they formed opinions that were slow to form and slow to change. He was aware of it as they came down the main street, the faces at windows and over fence lines, the blacksmith who came to his door, the woman from the dry goods store who came out onto her step. He was aware of all of it, and he walked steadily, and he held Zora's hand, and he did not walk faster. At the end of the main street, the Waystone's door opened, and Hilda appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at them coming up the road together, and her face did the rapid arithmetic of a woman who had known him for 2 years and was getting a substantial amount of information very quickly. "You're back," she said. "We're back," Abel said, both words intentional. Hilda looked at Zora. Zora met her gaze with the steady amber eyes. "Treaty signed?" Hilda asked. "Sealed and couriered," Zora said. "Good." Hilda held the door. "I kept the corner table clear." They went in. The Waystone smelled like wood smoke and old stone, and the specific smell of an inn that had been doing its job for many years, bread and candle wax and the cedar of the old beams. The fire was going. The corner table, Zora's table from the first night, was indeed clear, and Hilda had, Abel noticed, added a second chair to it, a practical and precise announcement of accommodation. He stood in his own common room and looked at it. His shelves, his bar, his books, his instruments in their cases, his maps rolled and sorted. The place he'd been coming back to for 8 years that had never felt like enough. "Well," he said. Zora was looking around the room with the attention she brought to new territory, taking it in, cataloging, and her face held something he had come to recognize as her particular version of contentment, not display, not performance, but the deep-seated settle of someone in the right place. She looked at the bar and the shelves and the fire. She looked at the corner table. She looked at him. "Show me the rest of it," she said. He showed her the rest of it. The kitchen and the larder, the 2 good upstairs rooms, and the 4 smaller ones. The stable and the yard with Hilda's kitchen garden still producing late greens. The storage room where he kept the survey maps, organized by region and year, the smell of paper and iron-gall ink that was the particular smell of his work. She stopped in the doorway of the map room and looked at the shelves for a long moment. "I want a copy of the updated Pilgrim Road survey when it's finished," she said. "You'll have it," he said. "You'll probably have helped make half of it." She turned to look at him in the doorway, and the light from the small window caught her the way light caught her sometimes. warm on the sage-green skin and the bronze rings and the amber eyes. And she was beautiful in the particular way of things that were exactly what they were and did not try to be anything else. And he was in love with her the way he was in love with good country. Completely, without reservation, with the full weight of his careful attention. She reached for him in the doorway of the map room, both hands on his face, and kissed him with the same certainty as on the balcony above the Pilgrim Road, and he kissed her back with everything he had, which was, he was learning, considerably more than he'd once thought. That evening the common room filled up the way it always did road traffic, a few crosswater regulars, the woman from the dry goods store who had been standing on her step as they came in, and who appeared at supper time with a studied casualness that told him she was gathering information for the village. Den Varley was not among them, which was fine. He would come around eventually or he would not, and Abel had made his position clear the first night. Zora sat at the corner table with her satchel open, not the treaty papers. Those were bound for Clan Courier, but the working papers, the road notes and contact records and the ongoing correspondence that was the actual substance of treaty implementation. She had, Abel realized, no intention of going anywhere for a while. She was setting up. He found himself behind the bar, pouring ale and watching her work, and the sensation in his chest was not the absence of something anymore. It was the presence of something, full and specific and without question. The dry goods woman, her name was Petra, and she had been in Crosswater longer than Abel came to the bar for a second ale and looked across the room at Zora, and then at Abel with the expression of someone constructing a sentence carefully. "She's the one from the treaty," Petra said. "I heard it was signed." "It was," he said. "Is she?" Petra began, then reconsidered. "She's staying." He looked across the room at Zora, who had looked up from her papers and caught the question at a distance, and who was watching him with those amber eyes that missed nothing, waiting. "She's staying," he said. Zora's mouth curved up, just the right side. He poured Petra's ale. He went back to work. Across the room, Zora went back to her papers, and the fire in the hearth burned steadily, and the inn held its warmth against the October night the way it always had, except that now the warmth had a different quality, a depth that it had not had before. At the end of the night, when the last guest had gone up or gone home, and the fire was down to coals, Hilda collected her coins and her cloak and went out the back door with a good night that contained everything and asked nothing. Abel latched the front door, bolted the shutters, banked the fire. Zora was still at the corner table, papers mostly sorted now, the treaties working documents in their proper order in her satchel. She was watching him move through the closing routine with an expression that was open and warm and completely without the armor that had been there on the first night. "You do the same things in the same order every night," she said. "I'm predictable," he said. "You're consistent," she said. "That's different." She stood up and stretched, the kind of full-body stretch of someone who'd been still for several hours, and she looked at him across the empty common room. He crossed to her. He took her face in his hands the way she'd taken his, and he looked at her properly in the last of the firelight, at everything she was, the scar and the bronze and the amber, the road dust still in the fold of her cloak, the woman who had walked through his door soaking wet and bleeding and had been at his table in the morning and had been in some form at his table ever since. "You were still here," he said quietly. "I was still here," she agreed. "Best decision I ever made," he said, "was leaving that ledger on the bar." She laughed, the real one, the deep one, the one that moved through him like home. And then she kissed him again, warm and certain. And outside the Waystone the Pilgrim Road ran south under the stars, all the way to the shrine cities and back, and the map of it was better now than it had been, with every ford and every danger and every good place noted with the care of a man who paid attention to the small things. And somewhere in the distance, the first frost was beginning to settle on the hill country like a clean page waiting. He had found his way to the right place at last, by the only method that actually worked, by going out into hard country honestly and following the road where it ran and trusting what he found. He was home. They both were. And in the morning and every morning after, the corner table had 2 chairs.